Alright, hey guys, welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to work on making a proximity mine kind of thing. I posted a Kismet example video about a couple days ago, I think. But we're actually going to do the tutorial here, so let me just show you what's going on. So we have this setup where we have two volumes. This one's just to trigger the button, and this one right here is where the proximity mine is. And if you walk through it, nothing happens when you are walking slowly, but if you're walking fast, and you'll see it, and it explodes and kills you. Or, what you can do, you can press this button, it'll show it, and if you step off the button after about 5 seconds, I believe, it'll disappear again. But if you step on it, you can see it, and then you can start shooting at it, then you can make it explode, and when you walk through it again, you get no damage, nothing triggers. And the last thing you can do with this, you can activate it, but then you can, evade it and not take damage or anything like that. So that's what we're going to work on here. So what we'll do, I'll show you off the Kismet. So it's kind of a lot. We have a buttload, a bunch of variables, and then a couple other nodes here. And this is the big one over here where you actually see all the information, all the logic, and everything like that. But we'll break that down once we actually do it. So what we're going to do, just going to go ahead, select all that, delete it, select all that, delete it. And we're going to start from scratch. But first things first, whenever you create a level, you want to always go to View, World Properties, and then in the game type, just make it UT game. That just makes it easier, gives you the weapons, and makes Kismet work better. Allows you to use specific nodes, everything like that. From there, we have this object. It's just a normal static mesh. It's one of the lights there. I always use it as a button. And then I have a cube here. It's our trigger volume. It's just a normal trigger volume. It's not a dynamic trigger volume. For those who don't know how to get a trigger volume, you take your builder brush, and you make the shape that you want. Once you have the shape you want, you go to volumes, all the way down the trigger volume, and then you select it, and then it gives you this green volume. So we got that for this button here. And then when we go over here, we have another volume. This is going to be the proximity of when you can activate the proximity mine. Then we actually have an interactor. It's just a random static mesh. But it's an interactor, and for collision, it's got block all, and we're going to animate that. And then we also have a particle here. This particle is going to be our explosion. By default, it's not on. I turned it off. It'll be activated, when we want it to be. And I just scaled it up by 1.7, but we'll go ahead and just scale that by 2 overall, just to make it a little bit bigger. Because bigger is always better, right? Okay, so that's everything we need in the actual scene. So now what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and set this up here from scratch. So let's open up Kismet. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to start creating variables, all the variables we're going to need. So for the first one we're going to need, it's going to be a float variable. They're quite zoomed out. So the float variable, default, it's going to be 0. We don't have to have that as any value because we're going to get the player's velocity whenever they touch the trigger volume. So we're just going to name this variable player velocity. And then we're going to also need a couple more float variables. So the next one is also going to be 0. We're going to call this player distance. This is going to measure how far away the player is from the proximity mine once it's activated. And the last one we're going to do is player damage. This is how much damage we're going to give the player every time he activates the proximity bomb and is within range of the explosion. So that's all the floats. The next one we're going to do, we're going to need a couple of integers. So let's go to new variable, int, and then another int. This one's also going to be 0. We're going to name this casted player velocity. Because what we're going to do is we're just going to take the player's velocity and make it into an integer. We're just going to convert it. That's what casting is. It just converts basically without getting too technical or anything like that. And then we're going to copy and paste this. We need one more integer. This one's going to be called casted player distance. It's going to do the same thing with the distance variable here. It's going to convert it from a float to an integer just so it's easier to compare. And there's no decimals or anything like that. The next thing we're going to do, we need a couple of Boolean variables. So let's right click, new variable, bool. This bool to start out with is going to be false. And it's going to be called B is touching proximity radius. This is just for whenever the player touches that trigger volume that we have set up. So we're going to copy and paste this. We need another Boolean. This next Boolean is going to be called B is proximity mine hidden. So B is proximity mine hidden. And then there's one more. Actually, this one's actually going to be true by default, just because the proximity mine is going to be hidden. It's going to be invisible. But then the last one, it's going to be, let's copy and paste this one. It's going to be false, so change the 1 to a 0. This one's going to be called B is proximity mine destroyed. And before we keep going with variables, there's one more thing I forgot to mention. With the intervector, if you type in hidden, there's going to be a display option that says hidden. By default, it's not, so you check that, and that makes it invisible to start out with. That's how you get it to be hidden at the very beginning. So going back here, there's only one more variable we need. It's going to be an empty object variable. That's going to be our instigator. So let's go to new variable, object, and then object. And we're just going to name this instigator. And then that's it. That's all our variables. So let's go ahead, just group these together. If you hold down Control and Alt and left click drag, you'll get that marquee selection. Press C to comment. We're going to name this variables. Variablers. Alright, variables. Perfect. So we got all that set up. So now we need to do some initial level initialization processes. Basically, we're going to do the animation for the for the mine itself. And then we're going to also attach a couple actors together at the start. There's going to be a bunch of things that we're going to be doing. So let's go ahead and get that started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to animate our proximity mine. So let's first create the event level loaded. So new event, level loaded. And then holding down the M key, left click, creates our matinee. Connect that to play. Let's go ahead and double click on matinee to open it up. Making sure that your intervector is selected in the scene. You right click in matinee, add new empty group. We're going to call this proximity mine underscore animation. We're going to right click on that group, add new movement track, and this is where we're going to actually make the animation. So we'll make it 5 seconds long. Actually, we'll make it 4 seconds long. So 0 to 1 second. Let's go up. Let's go down by 20. No, let's go down by 128. And then at 2 seconds, let's go back up by 28. And then at 3 seconds, let's go up by 128. And then at 4 seconds, bring it back down to 128. So if we loop that section, you should see it just go up and down. Now we're going to use quaternion interpolation just to make the transition smoother each time. And that's all the animation is. It's nothing too special. But what we need to do in the matinee node, we're going to do looping, just so it keeps looping. And that's really it. If you want to make the play rate faster, you can make it like 2 or 3. But I'm actually I'm going to do 0.8 just to make it a little slower. But that's really all we need to do for this animation. So if we go ahead and play, we're not going to see anything just because it's hidden. So let me unhide that real fast. So if we go back in, there it is. There's our proximity mine. So let's go make it hidden again. Let's open up Kismet a little bit more. So we need another level initialization node, or a level loading node. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to attach our particle effect to our intervector just so they're attached. So whenever you do destroy it, the particle effect's going to explode where the proximity mine had been. So we need the attach to actor node. So let's go to new action, actor, attach to actor. Plug that right in. So our target is going to be our intervector. So select that in the scene, right click on target, do new object bar using intervector 5. And then the attachment is going to be the actual particle. So let's select the particle in our scene, right click on attachment, and then do new object bar using emitter 0. And we have that set up, so that's perfect. So the last thing we're going to do, just for debug purposes, we're going to need another level loaded. And we're going to do new action, MISC, and we're going to go down to console command, plug that in. Target, this is going to be our player. So holding down the P key, left click on target, creates an all players node for our object variable. We're going to uncheck all players just so it's player 0. And then in the actual console command, we're going to type in show volumes, because that's one of our console commands. It's going to show us these volumes here, the 2 trigger volumes. So now if we play, we see these 2 trigger volumes. So that's all we need with that one. So that's all the level loaded things here. But what else we're going to need to do, we're going to make a call to this event later. We're going to just do a new action, event, activate remote event. We can name this event get player velocity. And we're going to make this loop every 0.1 seconds. So if you right click on the end there, do set activate delay, make it about 0.1 second, and then just loop it back to the beginning. What we're going to be doing, as soon as the level loads, we're going to keep getting the player's velocity, and then when the player touches that trigger volume, whatever velocity he's moving at, we're basically going to be like, alright, if you're moving this fast, you're going to activate the mine. If you're not moving that fast and you pass through this volume, nothing's going to happen, basically. So that's all our level initialization sections here. So let's select all these, hit C to comment, let's do level initialization, and we're good to go with that. So we're ready to move on to the next one, and what we're going to do is we're just going to get the part where we modify the player's health set up. It's just going to be a relatively easy call. So we're going to do right click, new event, remote event. We're going to make a call to this later. I'm going to name this event modify player health. And all we need to do here, we're going to right click, new action. I believe it's under actor, and then modify health. And now with modify health, we select the node itself. It's going to be a couple changes. The damage type, we're just going to do telefragged. Momentum, we're going to keep at 500. And then we're actually going to leave everything here the same past that point. So, because depending on, we're going to set the player damage. Eventually, we're actually going to use that node that we used before, that float variable. We're actually going to set that damage for us, so we don't have to worry about that. But what we need to do right now, the target, we're going to right click, do new variable, name variable. It's going to be our object. And it's going to be instigator. It's going to be whoever triggers that trigger volume touch. And then the amount, if we right click, actually we'll just copy and paste this instigator, make this a float, and then we name this player damage, plug that in. That's all we really need to do to modify the player health on a very basic level at the very beginning. We're going to add more to this, but I'll explain later what we're doing with that. But let's go ahead and select all this, hit C to comment. We're just going to name this modify player health based on distance. Just move that to put in place. And the next thing we're going to do, once again, we're going to do a remote event that we'll call later. Let's go new remote event. We're going to name this one destroy proximity mine. And what we're going to do here we're actually going to destroy this mesh. We're going to make a call to this whenever it's activated. So we're going to right click, new action, actor, destroy, plug that in, and then with that interactor selected, that the mine mesh itself, right click on target and make that the target for you. We're also going to set a variable here. So new action, set variable bool, plug that in. We're going to set the variable is proximity mine destroy. We're going to set that to true because at this point it is. So let's go ahead and copy one of these named variables, change its thing to bool, and then we're going to rename it B is proximity mine destroy. Got the check mark, so that's good. So that's our target. And then the value is going to be true. So let's create a new bool, change the 0 to a 1. And now we have that set up as well. So we're going to select this, comment it saying destroy proximity mine on explosion. So right now we have a lot of events that are not being called at the moment, but that's fine. We're just going to be doing this in order here. So what we're going to do now is there's going to be another remote event here. So right click, new event, remote event. I'm going to name this one unhide proximity mine. And when we want to unhide the proximity mine, whenever that's called, we want to make a check to see if it's already hidden or not. So let's go to new action, new condition, compare bool. So the bool we're going to be comparing is that bool that is the B is proximity mine hidden. So let's copy and paste that name variable, change the name to B is proximity mine hidden. Still got the check mark, so we're good. So if the proximity mine is hidden, what we're going to do is we're going to unhide it. So we're going to do a new action, toggle hidden. So true goes into unhide. And then the target, it's going to be that interactor. So let's copy and paste that variable that we have there for interactor 5. And then last thing we got to do here is new action. We're going to do set variable. We're going to set the other bool we have. The other bool is actually it's the same bool over here. It's going to be that it is proximity mine hidden. We're actually going to set that to false now because right now it's not hidden anymore. So that's what we have for that. And then we have another event. We're going to copy and paste this, but we're going to rename this remote event to hide proximity mine. And then this is almost the same, so let's copy and paste that. So we're still comparing the proximity mine hidden, except now it's instead of true, it's going to be if it's false, we're going to hide it again. Same interactor, but back down here where we set the variable, it's the same variable here, but we're actually going to set it to true instead of false because it's hidden again. So we got that set up as well. Last thing we're going to do is this trigger volume, this button. We're going to set up the touch event for this. So I have that selected in the scene, and what we're going to do, let's open up Kismet again fully here. We're going to right click, new event using trigger volume 1. It's going to be a touch event. So everything's going to be basically default except for max trigger count. That's going to be 0 just so that can be activated an infinite amount of times. So basically when the trigger volume is touched, we're going to make a call. So we're going to go to new action event, activate remote event. So every time this is touched, we're going to make a call to unhide proximity mine. We're just going to update that. And then every time it's untouched, we want to first set an activate delay of 5 seconds. So after the player touches it, we have 5 seconds until the next event's called. And we're going to copy and paste the remote event. We're going to rename this hide proximity mine. Still got the check mark, plug that in. Update this, got that checked. So this is everything set up for that button touch that unhides and hides that proximity mine. So let's go ahead and select all these. We're going to press C to comment, We're going to name this toggle visibility of proximity mine. We're just going to move this into place. And now this is the first thing we can actually test. So let's go ahead and see if we step on this button. Oh, which one is that? The get player velocity. What's going on with that? Alright, that's giving us problems, so we're going to ignore that. There we go. So we got to touch this volume. We're going to see if the interactor is unhidden, which it is. Perfect. And as long as we stay on this button, it's going to stay unhidden like that. But if we step off, we wait about 5 seconds, and it's going to hide itself again. Perfect. So we know that's working. So we're going to leave the get player velocity unplugged for a couple minutes here while we work on the next step, because the next section is the biggest section. This is where things are going to get kind of complicated here. So the first thing we want to do, we want to select our trigger volume, the main trigger volume that has the proximity mine in it or around it. This is what's going to affect the player, essentially. So having that selected, we're going to go ahead and right-click, new event using trigger volume 0, and we're going to do a touch. Now this touch event, it's going to be almost identical as the other. Actually, it's going to be exactly the same kind of settings are changed. It's just trigger count. It's going to be 0 instead of 1, just so it can be called an infinite amount of times. And then for the instigator, we're going to copy and paste that object variable. Where is that one? Instigator. Here it is. Copy and paste that. Plug that in to instigator just so we know who's touching it. Now what we need to do, the first thing we're going to do actually is set some variables right off the bat. So let's go to new action, set variable, bool. So touched goes into this bool. So now the actual target, the variable we're going to mess with, it's that Boolean variable saying is touching proximity radius. So let's copy and paste a already made Boolean named variable. And I'm going to name it B is touching proximity radius. Still got the green check mark, means we did it right. And then value, it's going to be true, just because if we're touching it, it's going to be set to true. And then we're going to almost do another kind of setup like this, except it's for the untouched. Same variable is going to be affected, but we're going to change it from true to false, so let's make that a 0. And that's all we need to do for the actual touch whenever we touch that variable. Not that variable, that trigger volume. So let's go ahead and just, we're not going to actually label this just yet, but the next thing we're going to do is create that remote event that says get player velocity. So let's do new event, remote event, get player velocity. It's green because we already made that remote event activation over here. So we're going to plug that back up, get it to check, and then we got that. Just so it's looping, so it's checking every 10th of a second. And what we're going to do is we're going to get the player's velocity. And when we call that, basically what we're doing, we're checking to see if the player is going to be touching that trigger volume. So let's go to new condition, compare bool, plug that in. And we're going to do the is touching proximity radius, that's the variable. So that's all we really need. And all we're going to really check for is if the player is touching that trigger volume. So only the true output's really what's going to do it, what's going to do anything. So the first thing we're going to do is new action, actor, and I believe it's get velocity. So we're going to get the velocity of whoever touches this volume. So the target is going to be the instigator. And then the velocity mag, or magnitude, that's going to be our player velocity name variable. Do we have one yet? Alright, we have a float one that's player damage, but we'll just rename that. So we rename that player velocity. Plug that in. And then we're going to cast it to an int, just so we can keep it clean. So I believe it's under math. Then cast to int. So you plug that into int, And then the result, we're going to copy and paste this one. Change the expected type to integer. And then casted player velocity goes into the result. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make a call to get player velocity again. So we don't need any delays on it. So let's bring this down. There we go. So basically we're going to call that again. And then after we do that, we're going to make a comparison here. We're going to see how fast the player is going. So let's do a new condition, compare, and we're comparing integers just because we made a cast. Hook that in. So A is just going to be casted player velocity, and B is actually going to be a specific integer number. It's 178 just from testing. That's a relatively slower speed. If you're walking like normal, you're going over 178 for sure. And when you're crouching and walking, you're going underneath 178, so your speed's lower. So that's why I chose that number. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn off the ability to show and hide the proximity mine using that button, that trigger. So let's go to toggle, new action, toggle, just a normal toggle. And whenever A is bigger than B, meaning the player's walking fast enough to activate the bomb or the proximity mine, we want to go ahead and turn off that touch volume event, the one that has the unhide and hide proximity mine. So we're just going to go to event and just drag that all the way up to this one. And we're also going to do a couple things at this stage, because we're also going to turn off one more event. We're going to turn off the touch event, this one over here, the trigger volume, the first trigger volume being touched. We're also going to turn that off. So we turned off both those events, so we don't have to worry about those reactivating. And we're also going to make a call to unhide proximity mine. So let's get a copy and paste that. Because when the player does touch this trigger volume and it activates, we want to go ahead and unhide the mine, just so he knows it's there. And then we're going to give the player about a second after they touch this volume and they activate the proximity mine. We're going to give them 1 second. So we're going to make it a delay after the toggle. We'll give them 1 second to see if they can get out of the way or get far away, from the proximity mine to the point where they won't take damage anymore. So what we're going to do here mainly, we're going to get the distance after a second. So let's go to new action, actor, get distance. Let's plug that in. A is going to be our instigator. So let's find that object variable. And then B is going to be the actual interactor, the proximity mine itself. So let's copy and paste that object variable. And then the distance is going to be our player distance float variable. So let's copy and paste the name variable, change its expected type to float, change it to player distance, put that into the distance node, and then we're going to cast it in again. So new action, math, cast it in, plug that in. Int goes with player distance. And then we're going to copy and paste this name variable, change the expected type to int, then change it to casted player distance, plug that into the result. And now what we're going to do is compare how far away the player is from. So we're going to compare the casted player distance to a couple of preset numbers that seems fair to me. So let's first go ahead and get a compare int condition. So let's go to new condition, compare int, and then after that, we're just going to plug that in. So A is going to be casted player distance. And then B is going to be a new int variable. We're going to put this as 300, so 300 units away. So if the player is, if the player distance is less than 300, we're going to do one more comparison. Casted player distance is going to be this one. But B, instead of at 300, it's going to be 200. So put that into B. Alright, so if the casted player distance is less than 300, we want to go ahead and compare it again, but to 200. So now if the if the player is less than 200 units away, so he's even less than 200 units away, that's when we want to kill the player. That's when we're going to do so much damage that he can't survive. So we're going to set some variables. So let's go to new action, set variable. We're going to do float. Plug that in from here. So our target, let's copy and paste casted player distance, change the expected type to float, we're going to change the name to player damage. So this is where we set that player damage variable. So this value is going to be 200, so that's 2 times the amount of health the player has, just to ensure that they do die. And then we're going to make a call to our remote event, modify player health. So let's go to new action, event, activate remote event, name this modify player health. Got that green check mark. Look that up. So basically this node is going to be calling this guy up here. So I'll just make sure that updates. But what else we're going to do? We're going to do another set of these. Copy and paste that. Put it up here. So basically, if A is greater than, so for this second comparison, if A is greater than B, meaning the casted player distance is greater than 200 and is less than 300, so he's within that range, so he's like 202 all the way up to like 299. If he's within that range, we're going to do another call to the second set of setting the float variable player damage and modifying the player health. Except instead of it being 200, we're only going to do 50, so the player's going to lose only half damage if he does get that close. So that's the main logic right here. So we get the velocity. If the velocity is greater than this, that's when we're going to give him a second, get as far away from the proximity mine as we can, and then boom, from there you're good, depending on what your distance is. But there is something else that we need to do as well. We need to turn on particle effect for the explosion, and we got to destroy the actual mesh. So what we're going to need to do is create a new toggle, new action, toggle, and then just toggle. And then the target is going to be our emitter, so let's select that in our scene. So emitter 0. And this gets plugged into 2 different things. It goes from the toggle, so we're going to turn that on. Or we're going to do another, we're going to create a remote event. So let's go to new event, remote event, and we're going to name this destroy proximity mine effects. Plug that into turn on. So first what we do is we turn on the explosion so you hear the explosion. And now we're going to need to play a sound. We're going to get an explosion sound. So let's do a new action, sound, play sound, plug it into play. The targets could also be the emitter. Basically the target for the sound node is basically saying, hey, where should the sound emit from? Where should it sound like it's coming from? So we want it to come from the explosion itself, and that's why we're putting that as our target. But the next thing we need to do is get a sound, an explosion sound. So let's look in our content browser, do sound cues. Let's just type in explosion. And what I chose here, it's this one, I believe. You can't really hear that just because of how low the TV is. But it's an explosion noise, so we're just going to select that. Go back into Kismet, select the play sound node, and then under play sound, just hit that green arrow. As long as I was selecting in your content browser, that's when you know it's good. So we need to make one last call. So let's go to new action, event, activate remote event. This one's going to call the destroy proximity mine mesh. That's not how I named it. How did I name it? Destroy proximity mine. So there's no mesh in the word. So get that out. So we see that got checked. Now we just need to update that. So basically when we have that happen, we make a call to destroy the interactor, and then we set that variable to true. So that's the majority of the logic here. There's one last thing we need to do before we do that, which is go ahead and group these together. We're going to name this main logic for proximity mine. And we're just going to move this into place. So the last thing we need to do is set up the take damage event so the player can actually destroy the proximity mine and not even have to worry about it. So what we need to do, first we need to select the actual mesh, the interactor. With that selected, let's right click in Kismet, new event, take damage. So for the take damage, there's only going to be one thing we're going to change, and that's the damage threshold. We're going to make that 50, so it doesn't take that much to destroy. And to make sure it's working for you, make sure this, whatever mesh you end up using, has collision, and that its collision is set to block all, just so it can actually take damage from the shots you're firing, basically. So when this is activated, when the mesh does take enough damage, we're going to make a call to that destroy proximity mine effects. So let's go to new action, event, remote event. And then we named it destroy proximity mine effects. That matches, that's why you have that green check mark. Just going to update it. Because every time this is called, the destroy mine effects, it plays that particle effect. And if we look back where it is, it turns on that particle effect, it makes the sound, and it does call that destroy proximity mine, so it then also destroys the mesh and deactivates all these events and everything. But the last thing we need to do is one last toggle. So let's do new action toggle. And it's going to be events again, so we're going to turn off. And the two events that we're going to have to turn off are the main touch volume, the trigger volume touch, the 0 one, the one that has the proximity mine near it. So let's go ahead and attach that. And then the second one is going to be the trigger volume _1. We're basically going to be deactivating both touch events, just so they don't get called again. And that's it. That's the last piece that we needed. So let me go ahead and select these guys. Comment saying allows player to destroy proximity mine. So let's just adjust that, make sure it's in place. And that is everything. So let's go ahead and see if any of this is working. So see if this is still working. It is, and let's see if we can destroy them. And we can. Cool. So now let's see if we can go ahead and activate it and die. Okay, so we're getting a problem. Kismet warning max Kismet steps exceeded. So it looks like something's getting called, and that's in here. I don't know if we need this one. Let me just plug that directly in and see if that happens again. Okay. Perfect. So that's all we needed. What we changed. We don't need to make this call again. That's something that we don't need to do. So let's go ahead and move these guys a little bit closer. Get closer. And let's just shrink this a bit. So we know it kills us. So let's go ahead and see if we can sneak by it. So we're gonna crouch, and we didn't activate anything, so we know that's working. Now let's see if we can evade it. And we did. Perfect. Let's see if we can get half damage done to us. See if we can find that sweet spot. There it is. Perfect. So we got everything working. So, once again, here's everything all together. The first thing we did, we created these variables up here. Instigator, that's just for whoever touches the volume. Then we have our player velocity. We have the player distance that we're going to track how far away they are from the actual mine. And then we have player damage. That's going to be the number we're going to tell, hey, you know, if you're this close, you're going to take 200 damage, or you're going to take 50 damage if you're, you know, not as close. Then we have casted player velocity and casted player distance. These are integers. These are just to make the numbers cleaner. And then we just have a couple of booleans to check if the player is touching the proximity radius, if the mine's hidden yet, and if the mine has been destroyed. And at the beginning here, we made this matinee. This animates the proximity mine, so it goes up and down. And then we attach that particle effect, that explosion particle effect, to the interbacter, that proximity mine, so that when it's destroyed, the particle effect will play, you know, where it was. So you don't see a random explosion somewhere else. The explosion happens where the mine is. And last but not least, we do a console command to show the volumes just for debugging purposes, and then we get the player's velocity, and we do that every 10th of a second. We're constantly checking the player's velocity, constantly checking if they're touching that volume. That, you know, activates the whole sequence. The next thing we do, we have this call to modify player health. This just modifies the health of the player based on what the player damage is, and we change the player damage down here just depending on the distance the player is from the mine at the time of activation. And we do this damage to whoever touched it, whoever started the whole thing. And then we make a call here to destroy the proximity mine on explosion. What we do, we use this destroy node to actually destroy the mesh so that it doesn't come back. And then we set that variable to the b is proximity mine destroyed to true, just because, you know, it is now. And then the next thing we do a couple things in this next section. We do the logic to unhide the proximity mine. This is when you touch the button, it can show the proximity mine. So we compare whether or not it's already hidden. If it is hidden, then we go ahead and use toggle hidden to turn it back on to unhide it. And we set that variable to false. The b is proximity mine hidden. And then we do the same thing on this end to hide the proximity mine again. So it's the same variable we compare. And then just if it's false, so if it is not hidden, we go ahead and hide it. And then tell that variable to say true. It's like, yeah, it is hiding right now. And then right here we have that trigger volume, the actual button volume over here. That's that touch event. So if it's touched, we unhide the proximity mine. When it's untouched, we give it 5 seconds before it goes ahead and hides that proximity mine again. And then here's the main logic. So right here, the main trigger volume. When it's touched and untouched, we set that variable b is touching proximity radius to true and false respectively. And then we have the actual call for get player velocity down here. We make the call up here first when the level's first loaded. But down here is actually the event. So what happens is every time we call get player velocity, it checks if we're touching the proximity radius. If we are, we go ahead and get the velocity. We see how fast we're going, and then we cast that velocity from a float to an int, and then we compare that integer to the number 178. That's just not a generic number, but it's a number I tested with to see what was best, so I chose that number. And if the player is moving faster than that, we're going to call that unhide proximity mine event, and then we're going to turn off both touch events, the touch trigger volume event and then the touch button event, the other one that unhides and hides the proximity mine. And then after a second, that's when we get the distance between the player and the mine itself. So after a second, we'll see how far away they are. And then, you know, we do that player distance, we cast that to an int, and then we start comparing that integer, but at the same time, we go ahead, when it does explode, we turn on that particle effect, we play that sound, and then we make a call to the destroy proximity mine just so the mesh is destroyed. But back down here, when we start getting the player's distance, we compare to see if it's less than 300 units. If it's less than 300 units and greater than 200 units, that's when we do the 50 damage. That's when they're kind of far away from the mesh, not the static mesh, but the interbacter for the mine. But if they're less than 200 as well, that's when we give them 200 damage. That's basically when it kills them, and we call that modify player health, and we set the player damage for what we need it to be. And then the last thing we do is that we have a take damage, and we set the max trigger count to 1 because it's only going to be destroyed once. But we also do the damage threshold. We change that from 100 to 50 just so it's destroyed easier. And then when that does activate, we call it the destroy proximity mine effects. That's this one. And like before, it turns on the particle effect, it plays the explosion sound, and then it destroys the mine. And then we also turn off those events, the touch event, just because the mine has been destroyed. So that is everything. That is the whole tutorial. So I hope you guys learned a lot. This was a fun one to make for me. So definitely like the video. If you enjoyed it, share it as much as you can. If you haven't subscribed and you like these videos, go ahead and subscribe for me as well. I definitely appreciate it. And hopefully we'll keep on growing, keep on doing all this cool stuff. So I hope you enjoyed it. I'm glad you watched, and keep on watching. Thanks, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye. Well, I gotta turn off the video now. Thanks for watching.